moose represent Maine, you know? They really do.
Upper Michigan's moose population could be in trouble. It's all because of one little bug.
When investigators opened the forensic report, one number stopped them cold: 90%. That was the mortality rate. 90% of the moose calves they'd been tracking were dead. 60 bodies, scattered across 2,000 square miles of frozen forest northwest of Moosehead Lake. But the autopsy findings were unlike anything they'd seen before. She's completely pale. When her organs are this coloration, that's a sign of anemia. She was being fed on by ticks. This is the official forensic investigation into why Maine's moose population suddenly started dying. And what investigators uncovered reads like something from a horror novel. The crime scene. The spruce fir forests of northern Maine should be quiet, peaceful. This is the domain of the moose, alces, giants that stand 6 feet at the shoulder and tip the scales at over 1,000 pounds. They've survived ice ages, brutal winters that would kill a human in hours. But starting in the early 2010s, something changed. Hunters were finding carcasses where they shouldn't be. Hikers reported seeing strange, pale animals stumbling through the trees. The woods were becoming a graveyard, and nobody knew why. So, the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife launched an investigation. The plan? Capture 70 moose calves born that spring. Fit them with GPS collars. Track their every movement via satellite. It was supposed to be a standard survival study.
Here it's like tacky and sticky, which is indicative of the feces of tick.
Then the dots on the map started going still, one by one. Ping stopped, ping stopped, ping stopped. By the time the snow melted in May, investigators checked their data and froze. Out of 70 calves, 60 were dead. Nearly 90% mortality in a single season. This wasn't a bad winter, this was a massacre. To understand what happened, they'd have to examine the bodies. The autopsy findings. When forensic teams reached the carcasses, they expected signs of predation, wolf marks, bear wounds, maybe evidence of disease. What they found was far worse. The calves were emaciated, skeletons wrapped in skin. But it was the skin itself that told the real story. It was moving, not from the wind. The fur was rippling because the animals were covered in a living carpet. Tens of thousands of parasites on a single body. The killer had a name, Dermacenter albopictus, the winter tick. Now, you might be thinking, it's just a tick. I pull those off my dog all the time. This is different. This is a biological weapon designed by nature to take down a giant. When investigators stopped counting, the tick total exceeded 90,000. 90,000 parasites on a single animal. If you scrape them all off and put them in a bag, they'd weigh as much as a heavy winter backpack. But this wasn't dead weight. Every single one was feeding. Every single one was hungry. And their food source? Blood. The forensic report on Moose Nor 59 was damning.
That's it right now, but those suckers get to be about this big.
Great big foot, great. Yeah.
Her bone marrow, which should have been creamy and fatty, was gelatinous and red. A textbook sign of severe malnutrition. Her body had burned through every ounce of fat, trying to replenish the blood she was losing. She was also pregnant, carrying a 12-pound fetus. The fetus had died inside her weeks before she collapsed. Her body simply couldn't support 2 lives anymore. It couldn't even support 1. And this wasn't an isolated case. Almost every calf they recovered told the same story. Mass casualty event. Silent, invisible. Until you were standing right over the bodies. Profile of a killer. To understand how these deaths happened, investigators had to study the killer's methods. Most ticks live complicated lives. They jump on a mouse, feed, fall off, find a bigger animal, feed again, fall off. It's a hard existence. Most die before finding a final meal. The winter tick operates differently. It's what scientists call a one-host tick. It puts all its eggs in one basket, or rather, all its hungry larvae on one moose. And it doesn't send scouts. It sends an army. The attack begins in late summer. Female ticks lay billions of eggs on the ground. When they hatch, the larvae crawl up plant stems and cluster together. Thousands of tiny interlocking legs, all waving in the air, waiting. Biologists call these questing clusters. They sense carbon dioxide from an animal's breath. They feel body heat. And they wait. When a moose brushes past that vegetation, the cluster explodes. In seconds, thousands of larvae transfer to the animal. They latch onto the fur and immediately start crawling toward the skin. A single moose walking through a bad patch of forest can pick up 100,000 ticks in a single day. But here's the critical finding. They don't bite and fall off. They move in for the winter. They'll spend the next 5 to 6 months living on this animal, feeding, growing, molting, and feeding again. The forensic math is terrifying. One engorged female tick drinks approximately 1 milliliter of blood. That sounds like nothing, just a drop. Multiply that by 90,000. We're talking liters of blood. A calf doesn't have that much to spare. Losing that volume is like a human donating blood every single day for weeks, without ever recovering. The autopsy reports documented acute anemia. Internal organs appeared ghostly white because there simply wasn't enough blood moving through them. But blood loss wasn't the only cause of death. There was also the torture. Death by 1,000 bites. Imagine 100,000 bugs biting you simultaneously. The itch would be unbearable, maddening. The moose stop eating. They spend all their time scratching, using their hooves, rubbing against trees, desperate to get the parasites off. This frantic grooming leads to something investigators documented repeatedly. The moose rub their own fur off.
While most bugs die in the winter, ticks show resilience to colder temperatures, and experts are warning about these bloodsuckers.
A moose's coat is an engineering marvel. Hollow hairs trap air, creating insulation that can withstand 40 degrees below zero. Snow can sit on a healthy moose's back without melting because no body heat escapes. When that coat is destroyed, the heat pours out. Now the animal is bleeding, starving because it's too busy scratching to eat, and freezing to death because it's destroyed its own winter coat. Forensic conclusion, triple cause of death. Starvation, exsanguination, being drained of blood, hypothermia. State moose biologist Lee Cantar described what investigators witnessed, watching a vampire swarm drain the life from a titan. But there was another critical finding in the report. The moose had no defense mechanism. Other animals have dealt with ticks for millions of years. White-tailed deer are grooming machines. They feel a tick and remove it instantly. They're programmed for self-defense. Moose, they're newcomers to North America. They crossed from Asia only 10 to 15,000 years ago. In evolutionary terms, that's arriving yesterday. They never developed a defense against the winter tick. Scientists call them evolutionarily naive. They're sitting ducks, and biology knows it. The ghost moose phenomenon. When moose rub their fur off, they expose the pale undercoat and raw skin beneath. From a distance against the dark tree line, these animals appear white. They look like specters floating through the woods. Sightings of these ghost moose have become common in Baxter State Park and across northern New England. But seeing one isn't magical, it's tragic. A ghost moose is a dying moose. An animal so irritated and in so much pain that it's destroyed its only protection against the cold. Hikers report that these animals act strangely. They don't run away. They linger on trails. They stare blankly. Why? Because they're exhausted. Their energy reserves are gone. They're literally too tired to flee. And even those that survive carry permanent damage. A cow with a heavy tick load is far less likely to conceive the following year. If she does, she's more likely to miscarry. The population takes hits from two sides, babies dying and mothers too weak to reproduce. It's a death spiral. Root cause analysis. The winter tick has always existed in Maine. It's a native species. So investigators ask the critical question, why is it suddenly killing 90% of the calves? Why now? The answer was in the climate data. Remember those larvae questing on plants in the fall? They have a weakness, cold and snow. In the 1970s and 80s, winter came early to Maine. Hard frosts hit in October. Snow blanketed the ground by November. When snow covers the ground, larvae can't reach a moose. Cold snaps killed millions of them before they ever found a host. It was nature's reset button. But according to NOAA data, average temperatures in Maine have risen about 3 degrees Celsius since 1895. 3 degrees doesn't sound like much, but in the world of parasites, it's the difference between life and death. The fall season is stretching out. September is warmer. October is milder. Snow doesn't stick until December or January. Instead of having 2 or 3 weeks to find a host, ticks now have 2 or 3 months. The Journal of Wildlife Management confirmed it. Warmer falls lead directly to higher tick abundance. Warmer planet equals more ticks equals dead moose. But that wasn't the only contributing factor. Commercial logging in Maine created massive amounts of regenerating forest, shrubs, saplings, willows, moose food. The population exploded. In some areas, density reached 40 moose per 10 square miles. High density is exactly what a parasite needs. More hosts walking past, more chances to latch on, more opportunities to feed. Forensic conclusion, we created a perfect storm. We packed the moose together like sardines. We warmed the planet, allowing ticks to survive longer and breed faster. We built a tick factory. The controversial solution. The investigators knew they couldn't just watch the population collapse. They needed a solution.
Wildlife Department proposing a moose hunt to reduce the impact of winter ticks. The department is recommending 180 moose hunting permits be issued for the northeastern corner of the state.
What they proposed made a lot of people angry. To save the moose, they decided they might have to kill them. It sounds insane, but the logic is based on density dependence theory. If too many moose allow tick populations to explode, then fewer moose might starve the ticks out. In 2022, Maine launched the experiment. They split Wildlife Management District 4 in half. In the western half, standard hunting quotas, the control zone. In the eastern half, dramatically increased hunting permits, specifically for antlerless moose. The goal wasn't extermination, it was to lower density from 40 moose per 10 square miles to around 20 or 25. The theory? Fewer moose walking through the woods means fewer buses for ticks to catch. If a questing cluster waits on a branch and no moose walks by for 3 months, those ticks die, freeze, starve, don't reproduce. Early results are compelling. In areas where they reduced herd density, tick counts on surviving moose dropped significantly. Calves had better survival rates. The moose were healthier. Density was the trigger. But this is a bitter pill. It means the days of seeing a moose around every corner in Maine might be over. To have healthy moose, we might have to accept having fewer moose. Quality over quantity. Other solutions were tested. Fungal biopesticides that kill ticks but not moose. Permethrin collars, like flea collars for dogs, that reduce tick loads by 70%. But you can't catch and collar 60,000 wild moose every year. It's logistically impossible. So, we're back to the hard choice. Forensic report. This case is a warning. It shows how climate change isn't just about melting ice caps or hotter summers. It's about the invisible connections in nature. It's about how a few degrees of warmth can unlock a biological monster. As Lee Kantar stated, the tick is acting as a predator enhanced by the shifting climate. The winter tick has been weaponized by our warming planet. Maine's moose are tough, they're survivors, but they're facing an enemy they cannot fight with hooves or antlers. The forensic evidence is clear. The line of death is moving north. Areas that used to be safe havens are now infection zones. In New Hampshire, tick mortality rates have hit 70%. Vermont's moose population has crashed 60% since 2000. Maine was supposed to be the stronghold. The future of the Northwoods depends on how we respond to this crisis. It requires tough choices. It requires looking at the data, even when it's ugly. Because if we don't act, the only moose left in Maine might be the ghosts haunting the snow. The silence in the forest is getting louder. The question is, are we listening? Would you support a mass hunt if it meant saving a species from extinction? Or should we let nature take its brutal course? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more investigations into nature's darkest mysteries.